Thank you very much for waiting, ladies and gentlemen. We now begin the Mori Art Museum session number 2. And I have the honor of introducing the speakers for the session. Lars Nittve, Executive Director of M+ in Hong Kong. He joined West Nolan Cultural District Authority in January 2011. He was formerly a director of the Modern Musette and first director of Tate Modern. He has over 30 years of international experiences as a director, curator, and educator of the arts. He was awarded the honorary PhD at Umeå University in Sweden, and he was named professor at the same university in 2010. Eugene Tan, Director of the National Art Gallery Singapore, Program Director of the Singapore Economic Development Board. He's a director of the National Art Gallery Singapore, scheduled to open in 2015. His previous appointments include Director for Contemporary Art at Sotheby's Institute of Art in Singapore and Director of the Institute of Contemporary Art Singapore. Chung Hyung-Min, Director of the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, Korea. She is presently Professor of Art History at Seoul National University College of Fine Arts as well. She has been the Director of Museum of Art, Seoul National University, President, Korean Associate of Art Theory, and he has published many books, including Modern Korean ink painting, Technical Drawing of the Late Joseon Korea, and the Concept of the Orient and Modern Korean Art. The moderator of the session is Fumio Nanjo, Director of the Mori Art Museum. Mr. Nanjo, please come up on the stage. So we will now begin the Mori Art Museum Session 2 of the Innovative City Forum. The theme is what is happening in Asia today.
この Innovative City
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is day 3 of Innovative City Forum. Day 1, we focused on technology, and yesterday we talked about how culture art could be incorporated in large urban development. We also had designers, architects, and artists featured in our sessions. And today we are focusing on art. We have 3 sessions on Mori Art Museum. Session 1 looked at the history of art foretelling the future. In this session 2, we will be looking at museums, not just the infrastructure, what's happening in Asian art scene. We have 3 speakers. The first speaker is Lars Nittve. Around 1990, in Rosenu Museum, when he was with that museum in Sweden, I first met him. I've known him ever since. Currently, he is the executive director of M+ in Hong Kong, Kowloon West, which I believe is a reclaimed land, a brand new museum. I think it's going to take some time before that is going to be completed. So he's going to talk about this gigantic museum to be created in Hong Kong. Lars, please.
Thank you, Fumio, and thank you, Madame Mori, for the invitation to also take part in the celebration, this 10th anniversary of this museum, Mori Art Museum, that has done so much actually to the art scene, not only in Tokyo or in Japan, but actually in Asia and the world as well. And it's an honor to be here. I was here for the opening 10 years ago, and I'm delighted to be back, and have, of course, been back many times since. I will try to talk about something here now in 25 minutes, which I usually take an hour and a half to talk about. So we will see where that takes us. I'll talk about the museum project that Fumio was mentioning, called M+, which is part of the West Kowloon Cultural District, which is a large sort of future cultural development in Hong Kong. This gives you some sort of idea of the location. This is a photo taken through a work by Thomas Saraceno, which was part of an exhibition called Inflation last spring. And it sort of shows the sort of background of skyscrapers, which is the site for the museum. And we'll see a little bit more about that later on. To say something very briefly about M+, in our mission statement, we say the following, that it's more than a museum or a building. It will be a new type of cultural institution focused on 20th and 21st century visual culture, broadly defined. From a Hong Kong perspective, with a perspective of now and with a global vision. And of course, as all these sort of mission statements, they you're trying to condense lots of ideas into one or two sentences, and they are what they are, but I think the essence is actually there. So I could stop there, but I won't do that. I'll try to outline a little bit about what we're trying to do. And I think it has to do with a number of things. Well, maybe I should say first that when I was recruited to this project, there were basically three flags that were being waved that attracted me. The first one was that it clearly was from the government of Hong Kong, which is the organization that stands behind it, that took the initiative, and that actually funds it. It was that it's a very ambitious project. And then I'm not just talking about size. It is a very ambitious project in terms of its budget and size and so forth, but there are always larger projects and bigger museums being built somewhere. So that's not the thing. I think also the ambition in terms of museological perspective was really something that attracted me a lot. And that paired with, I should say, a very strong public service ethos, and the fact that it was underlined from day one that this is not a project that is primarily sort of created in order to attract tourists. It's primarily created as a project for the people who live and work in Hong Kong. And the aim is to really root it in Hong Kong as well. Of course, naturally, we all know this who've been working with museums over the years, that it's exactly those museums that also become the big attractions for the rest of the world. Because, of course, the reason you travel is because you want to see something that is different from where you live and work. You want to see something else. So a museum rooted in Hong Kong probably will also lead to it being a tourist attraction, but that's not the driver. I think that's important. So these two things, there was the ambition, and there was the sort of public service ethos. And the third thing, the third flag that was waved, was the fact that we were actually asked, even though this was such a huge project, to try to rethink the models of what a museum could be in the 21st century and in Asia. We were sort of encouraged to challenge the givens. We'll see how much we do challenge the givens. I think that one of the key things we're trying to do is, in a way, also to maintain the idea of a museum and what the museum stands for, which are certain values, a sort of free space for ideas, and a democratic space. And we try to maintain the symbolic value and the sort of recognition of that, while at the same time trying to rethink the existing models a bit. Just to say something about being a museum of visual culture and how that is different from being a museum of visual art, or a museum of architecture, or a museum of design. Because we're actually collecting visual art, architecture, design, and what is broadly called moving image, which of course is not only cinema, but it is cinema, and of course Hong Kong has a strong history in terms of cinema and movies, but it's also all other aspects of moving image that sort of happens under various categories and under different umbrellas in a sense. But being a museum of visual culture, I think to us is about actually understanding that you have all these different categories and things are sometimes made under these headings, but that these headings are, both if you look at it globally, more and more fluid, I think. I think if you look at it globally, I think there are lots of things that happen. Some of the most interesting things that happen actually in the border areas between one type of category and another type of category quite often. And if you move to Asia, I think you notice quite soon that actually these categories are not as valid here as they are typically in Europe or in America. There is much more fluidity between the categories among practitioners, especially. Not so much among museums or in the market, but definitely among practitioners. And if you just look at a small place in Asia like Hong Kong, it's so obvious that some of the best artists are actually also the best graphic designers, or maybe architects, or maybe even advertising people. And they can easily move from 1, 2, 3 of these roles within the same day without losing credibility in any of these areas. And I think that makes them, if you're not Andy Warhol, that makes it totally different and is a totally difference from the situation in Europe, for example, where it's very hard to be trusted as an artist if you have at the same time work in an advertising agency, or if you work with graphic design or something like that. That it's very hard to achieve, but it's more natural in Hong Kong, you would say. And what we're trying to do is, of course, not just doing what the Museum of Modern Art has done for many, many decades, which is to have departments for these different areas, but actually to try to create a museum that embraces this fluidity, this flow between these categories, and look at them in parallel, while of course also recognizing that there are stories that are specific to each of these defined categories. You can't escape that at the same time, but to maintain that fluidity in the sense of dialogue. And this is of course reflected in how we plan the museum building, how we plan the team, and how we collect. And this is in a way how we collect at the present. We collect visual culture. We have we've gotten the furthest in the field of visual art, but in architecture and design we have moved quite a bit as well. So if that's one thing we're doing, then the question is, what does it mean to have a global vision? Well, I think there are, among speakers today, for example, the Reina Sofia, and there will be later, say, Tate in the afternoon. Of course, there are museums with global visions as well. They look, but basically what they do, and what you do always, and what the great museums in the West have been doing is they've always looked at the world from where they are. When you walk around in Tate Modern, for example, you never doubt that you're in London when you see the works. You never doubt that you're in the UK or in Europe, but you're also in the world. And I think in, say, 4 or 5 years' time, when you hopefully walk around in M+, you would see that you're maybe even in West Kowloon. This is the actual site of the future museum. There's a pointer here even. I can tell you exactly where it's going to be built. It is here, basically in this area. And this is a site that is facing Hong Kong Island. So it's on the Victoria Harbour, facing the central part of Hong Kong Island and the sort of jungle of skyscrapers you have there. So you may know that you're in West Kowloon. You'll definitely notice that you're in Hong Kong, and that together with the Pearl River Delta and China will form the core of the collection. There's no doubt about that. And that's not only when it comes to art, but to design, to architecture, and so forth. But we will also, of course, be hopefully quite rich in our collection and in our exhibition program when it comes to Asia and further afield. So in a way, we do what other museums have been doing in the West, but just shifting the perspective to simplify it a bit. But then, of course, you also have the exhibition program, and the exhibition program can counter these things. I think that what Hong Kong artists have been longing for, and artists in the region have been longing for, is a platform where they can make exhibitions that are recognized outside the local art scene in Hong Kong, just like in so many other cities. I mean, here, Tokyo-based or a Japanese artist can have a show in the Mori Art Museum, and the world will take note of that, and will look closer at that artist and ponder, that's interesting, even if you don't know the name and don't know the body of work. And I hope that M+ can become that platform for the artists from Hong Kong and from the region. But even more, maybe it's almost an emergency, is the need to bring art from the rest of the world to Hong Kong and to the audience who lives and works in Hong Kong and to the art scene there. That's something that's been lacking, absolutely, almost totally lacking over the years. And that's a long story why this is the case, but if you compare with performing arts, if you're interested in classic music or in ballet or something like that, you can almost go to a great concert every day with a major performer, conductor or so in Hong Kong. But in terms of art exhibitions and design exhibitions and so forth, that's been a totally different story. That is, of course, goes back in time, why that's the case. So to bring art from the rest of the world. And of course, also the exhibition program can also counter the sort of preliminary timeline we're working with. Typically, we expect that the collection will start, the stories will start around 1949 after the sort of major changes that happen in the region as a result of the creation of the People's Republic of China, the movement of people, the sort of cultural and economical shifts that happened. But it's also a story that will go back occasionally further back in time. For example, might be of interest to a Tokyo audience. We recently bought a number of drawings of Frank Lloyd Wright's designs for the Imperial Hotel here in Hong Kong, or in Tokyo, which was a building that was incredibly important for sort of the development of early modernism in Asia. And so it's a sort of a key building, and we want to sort of have some strings going down further in history to sort of anchor the stories we're telling. And another aspect of the collection, I should say, is that we are, I think, slowly developing, or is seen by practitioners, artists, designers around the world, a little bit for Chinese artists in the diaspora, or Chinese designers, Chinese architects, as a home away from home. And we've started to collect quite systematically now works by Chinese artists or artists with Chinese background, first, second, third generation, who have maybe a double cultural identity or so, and they are looking for a place where they can find another type of resonance for their work, where the sort of their culture, the Chinese side of their cultural background and history can have another type of resonance. So that's an aspect of the acquisition policy, and possibly also of the exhibition program. We have a bit of a mantra. We have a number of mantras in the museum. One is more sort of focusing on the importance of education, and which is basically based on the idea that the more you know, the more you see. It's a little bit going back to, I think, what David was talking about, also about connoisseurship ultimately, but about, you know, of course it's true. The more you know about anything in the world, the more you actually see and understand and discover also. And the second one is that you should never confuse the museum with the building. And I think that's incredibly important. I think we all have a tendency, and I know reporters always have that tendency to sort of ask you, so when will the museum open? And that is always, when is the building up there? But of course, the museum is really rather a content and its relationship to its audiences. It's a platform for this meeting, and the building is a tool as a part of that. But it is a rather important tool, and it has symbolic value as well, which is rather important. So we are building a building. Let's see if it... And these are some images of the relatively recently decided design. It's designed by Herzog and de Meuron, the Swiss architecture team who, as it happened, also designed Tate Modern, but also here in Asia, for example, the Bird's Nest Stadium in Beijing. And it's a rather simple and straightforward design, actually. It's basically like two slabs, one horizontal slab, one vertical slab. And it's quite a confident building that's also, of course, has to manage the sort of the skyscrapers behind the building and stand up against them without being able to sort of rise as high as they do. And we wouldn't want that. And it sits there on the waterfront. In Hong Kong, people have noticed that it looks exactly like Typhoon 3 warning. I don't know if you have the same warning system here in Tokyo, but that's like, it's not the moment when everyone has to go home and close their doors and lock themselves in. It's a pre-warning that something is building up. There's something being stirred up. Watch, be aware. And we sort of like that symbolic side to it, actually. It's not so bad. It sits in the park, so it will have entrances from the more urban side of Hong Kong and the cultural district, and it will have entrances from the park, which will be quite leisurely and open and welcoming and friendly. It has, I think, some features that are unique. It's built on, as Fumio said, it's built on reclaimed land, and one would think that reclaimed land is a very neutral piece of land, but this is actually a piece of land that is full of tunnels and railway systems and God knows what. So it's like a minefield we're building in. And one of the things that sit under the building on one corner is this structure, which is actually the express train to the airport. And typically for, I think, Herzog and de Meuron's approach, instead of seeing it as many of the other competitors did, seeing it as a huge problem that you had to sort of get away from one way or another, try to cover up, try to build bridges over or so. They instead did basically what they did at Tate Modern. They saw when everyone else saw the turbine hall in Tate Modern as a big problem that you had to sort of navigate away from. They embraced it. And in a way, they've done the same here. They've created a found space, and they excavated the space, rather, and gave us a sort of an maybe awkward, but also amazing additional exhibition space, which is, of course, shaped by and sort of reflects the tunnel structure in a way, and makes you aware of the fact that that tunnel is there. Of course, at the same time, you have to isolate it from vibrations and things like that. So that just gives you some sort of idea of the thinking about the building. Otherwise, this is far from the final design. This was their exhibition entry, and it's going through now great revisions in terms of design. But it's a building that, of course, will house and have all the functions you typically expect in a museum, with the white cubes and black boxes, but also and it's really quote unquote industrial space, because you can't simulate industrial space in a new built museum building, but spaces that are more like almost like black box theater or a theater space or so with gantry cranes in the ceilings, high ceilings, raw materials where you can do things that you typically can't do in these museums. And it's a large one. It's about 60,000 square meters, and that gives us about 15,000 square meters of exhibition space. And then, of course, libraries, archives, auditoriums, cinemas, different types of screening rooms, and so forth. I think one of the important things that we're trying to do is to rethink also the modes of presentation, the kind of physical spaces, but also the intellectual spaces that you need for a museum that is where it is. I mean, for example, is there a different type of space for the presentation of works that are ink art works that maybe actually live their lives on scrolls? The traditional way of looking at scrolls, of course, is a much more intimate process where you, and much more collective in a way. You often roll things up together, study it, and so you don't look at them as paintings on the walls behind glass, for example. Is there another space and another system of looking, and even other digital means that you can help amplify this experience and get closer to the original sort of scholarly experience, for example? Are there alternative spaces for viewing and looking at moving image material where you can be more active as a viewer than in the existing sort of projection one-to-one type of situation? Are there places where you actually can curate yourself, be active, pair, compare, as you do when you walk around in the painting exhibition, for example? And are there third spaces that we can explore? Can you break up this barrier between front of house and back of house? I mean, the idea of third space, I think, was developed, or the model that was used when sociologists talked about third space was actually the cafe in the TV series Friends. You know, the place that was neither at home or at work, but another space. And in a way, can you sort of break up that barrier between the secret things in the museum and the obvious ones? Already museums are working on that, but we try to explore it further. On the upper left is actually an example from my previous museum at the Moderna Museet, which is like a jukebox for art, actually. It's a sort of robot that brings art to you that you've chosen to look at. And this is an example of making conservation processes and so more visible. And of course, as I said, the museum, you shouldn't confuse the museum with the building. And in parallel to building this building, we're building a digital building, so to say, a digital space, which is equally important almost now, not only in terms of reaching audiences, communicating with audiences, but also because it is a platform for production and dissemination of works that are made specifically for digital art or for a digital platform, which is pretty obvious. And again, we're not only in the building, we will be outside the building. So public art will be a central element for us, as well as trying to maintain an exhibition program that does not happen within the building, but continues to happen out in the city as we are doing now. We have a quite extensive program called Mobile M+ that takes place in different parts of Hong Kong, in different types of locations, a few times per year. So that's an important reminder as well to always think about the building as a tool and as a focal point and as a symbol, but it's not the same as the museum. The museum goes beyond all of that. Thank you.
Lars さん、ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. How to use a building or the concept of architecture, the new way of display, many creative initiatives were taken. And if this is possible, 10 times more display floor of Mori Museum will be presented. And closer to Japan, birth of new museum like this is very wonderful.
Next speaker is Eugene Tan. In 2006, he was one of the creator team of Singapore Biennale. He was a young creator back then, but he is now the director of National Museum. And a little before that, development of Economic Bureau, there was Gilman Barrack, which used to be the barrack of the military force. The remaining building of this barrack is now converted to an art gallery. And this is part of city development. And he was involved with this as well. In Singapore, in English they say you can put on many different hats. He is involved with the work of Economic Bureau as well as Cultural Bureau. The only talented person can put on different hats. So he will be presenting multiple perspectives. Eugene Tan, please.
Thank you, Fumio. And thank you to the Mori Museum and the organizers of the forum for inviting me to speak here. Well, the title of my talk today is Art in a City's Future, Singapore and Southeast Asian Art Histories. So I won't just be speaking about the National Art Gallery, but also its relationship to recent developments in Singapore as well as to Southeast Asia. In projections as to what the city-state of Singapore could be like in 20 years' time, art takes on a central role. The visual arts in particular have had a steadily rising profile from the late 1990s to the present. This burgeoning artistic scene in Singapore has been made possible by a confluence of factors. The first is the recognition by the state that the arts need to be a more important part of our society in Singapore, as demonstrated by the establishment of the National Art Gallery and other developments that I will now speak about. The other factor relates to the relationship between the development of art and the identity of Asia in the era of globalization. The identity of Asia is one that has always been determined by its economic realities. And while in neoliberal capitalism, an underlying premise is continued economic progress, the notion of economic progress is even more significant for Asia, whose identities have long been determined by its economic realities. The consequence being that the development of art and economic modernization in Asia are intimately linked. Current understandings of Asia have largely been derived from the region's growth as an economic power, led by Japan in the post-war period, followed by the rapid growth of the so-called tiger economies of Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan, as well as a currency crisis faced by Southeast Asian economies at the end of the 1990s. And more recently, the economic resurgence of China, India, and Southeast Asia through the potential that the fast-growing consumer markets are seen to have. The economic potential of Asia has been further highlighted in recent years, given the contrasting economic woes in Europe and America. And within Asia, with Hong Kong now a part of China, Singapore has emerged as an important economic center from which to reach out to the rest of the markets in Asia, thereby strengthening its strategic position within the region. The strong correlation between economic development and modernity in Asia, as in many parts of the world, has also resulted in the increasing dominance in the region of the art market. This is perhaps more pronounced in Asia due to the less developed cultural ecology, and is in effect a conflation of economic globalization and cultural globalization. The importance of the market has resulted in the disproportionate level of power that collectors now hold within the complex and intricate power relationships that exist between them and galleries, curators, art critics, and museums. This has resulted in a situation where art's commodity status, in effect, dominates its other social, art historical, and aesthetic values. Singapore has emerged with the potential for it to effect a different role in the region, with institutions such as the National Art Gallery, as well as other recent developments. Since the opening of the Singapore Art Museum in 1996, there have been significant additions to the ecology of the visual arts in Singapore. Singapore's inaugural participation in the Venice Biennale in 2001 was one such development. The Singapore Pavilion has since seen presentations by artists such as Lim Tze Chuan, Ming Wong, and Ho Zun Yan. The Singapore Biennale, which Fumio mentioned earlier, has also emerged as an important platform for the production of new work by regional artists since its first edition in 2006. And the artistic director for the first two editions was none other than Fumio Nanjo himself. The next edition, which opens next week, will be even more focused on art from Southeast Asia than previous editions. Complementing these institutional initiatives are developments which have focused on growing the marketplace. ArtStage Singapore is an art fair that was started in 2011 by Lorenzo Rudolph. It has since also successfully positioned itself as a fair for Asian art through its platforms which focus on the artistic scenes of various Asian and Southeast Asian countries. Another recent development is Gillman Barracks, which opened in 2012. As its name suggests, Gillman Barracks is a former British military camp which has been converted into a new arts district. Envisioned as a site for the production, discussion, and expression of art, it comprises more than 15 international and Singapore galleries, as well as a new center for contemporary art that will house a residency program, a research center, as well as an exhibition program. The German-born curator, Ute Mette-Bauer, was recently named as its director ahead of its opening later this month. Galleries at Gillman Barracks include Shang Art and Pearl Lam galleries from Shanghai, Tomio Koyama, Mizuma, Ota Fine Arts from Tokyo, and Southeast Asian galleries such as The Drawing Room and Silver Lens from the Philippines, as well as Arndt and Michael Jensen from Berlin. The addition of these galleries into the cultural ecology in Singapore, together with the new Center for Contemporary Art, will further establish Singapore as a center for art production in the region. And complementing these developments is the establishment of the new National Art Gallery, which also speaks to Singapore's positioning within Southeast Asia. Art in Singapore's future is born out of an historical awareness and sense of locality, a recognition of historical and geographical moorings in our region. The commitment to research in the arts of Southeast Asia is at the core of the National Art Gallery, a commitment to be the locus and the facilitator of discourse about the production of art, its presentation, as well as the shared and singular histories of nations and individuals that have been the backdrop and catalyst of art practice and research in the region. This is the two existing buildings. The National Art Gallery will be situated at the heart of Singapore's historic civic district, where it will occupy the conserved and expanded spaces of two national monuments, the former Supreme Court and City Hall. City Hall is the building on the right, and the building with the dome on the left is the Supreme Court. Both buildings were built during the time Singapore was still a British colony. City Hall was built in the 1920s to house municipal offices, and the former Supreme Court in the 1930s. In 1959, the first Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, and his cabinet were sworn in there, and they established their offices there, signifying the new government's break from British colonial rule. Over the years, the ministries that were housed there gradually moved out, and in 2000, City Hall became a part of the Supreme Court, which was then still housed in the former Supreme Court building. And just to give you some, this UFO-like structure is not a part of the building, but it's a structure of the new Supreme Court, which sits directly behind these two buildings. And it's actually a building by Norman Foster. The former Supreme Court was designed by British architect Frank Dorrington Ward, with columns and sculptures created by Italian artist Cavaliere Rodolfo Nolli, whose work can also be found in other significant buildings in Singapore. At the site now, new spaces are being created underground and above the existing buildings. As you might be able to see, the architect has designed a new rooftop which links the two buildings together, along with bridges that run between the two buildings, as well as a new basement level that connects them. Some key milestones in the development of this project. In 2007, the then Ministry of Information, Communication and the Arts held an international architectural design competition. Resulting from this, Studio Milieu architects were selected in 2008. Work started in 2011 and was scheduled to open in the later part of 2015. Some more details about our building. They have been gazetted as national monuments. Has a total floor area of 60,000 square meters, similar to M+, with about 18,000 square meters of exhibition and programming spaces. It's a short video here that gives you a sense of what the building will be like from the architect's point of view. So this is the atrium that sits between the two buildings. There's a new basement level that I talked about, which also includes some changing gallery spaces. And then the rooftop, which will be used for restaurants as well as a public viewing deck. So our mission is to be a leading visual arts institution that inspires and engages our people and our neighbors, creating a dialogue between the art of Singapore, Southeast Asia, and the world. We are interested not only in being a site, a space where art is seen, but also in being a locus of exchanges, a facilitator of discourse about art and visual culture. Singapore has a rich history as a conduit of exchange, from the exchanges of commerce and trade in the beginnings as a free port, bringing with them the flows of people that have engendered its cosmopolitanism, and of course the flows of people from different cultures bring with them the flow of ideas. The region itself begs to be defined in terms of flows, from the trade winds and maritime trades of the early times to the grouping of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, a grouping based on multilateral and mutual social, political, and economic collaboration. This gives you a sense of how the spaces are laid out within the buildings and the gallery spaces. The Southeast Asia galleries will occupy most of the former Supreme Court buildings from levels 1 to 5. Level 2 of the City Hall building will be used for the Singapore Gallery, and then we'll have changing gallery spaces in the basement as well as on levels 3 and 4 of the City Hall building. How then can the National Art Gallery contribute to the visual arts ecology in Southeast Asia? Extensive gallery space in our museum will be devoted to a long-term display of Southeast Asian art, which will be drawn largely from our national collection, one of the most extensive collection of art from Southeast Asia. And this will be one of the first attempts to present the art histories of Southeast Asia in such a comprehensive manner. Well, as I mentioned, we'll also have, in addition to the Southeast Asia Gallery, we also have galleries devoted to art from Singapore, but today I'll focus on our Southeast Asia Gallery. The display in the Southeast Asia Gallery will be based on a thematic chronology which demonstrates the depth and diversity of art in the region within a paradigm of shared historical experiences. Our aim is not to offer a comprehensive overview of every country, but to highlight key impulses to art making across the region. At strategic points in the narrative, we will also feature materials drawn from other fields of visual culture, such as architecture, photography, illustration, and film. In short, what we aim to achieve through the Southeast Asia Gallery is as follows: to historicize the development of art in Singapore and Southeast Asia from the 19th century to present day. We're also seeking to rewrite the art history or art histories of Southeast Asia through reflexivity about how this history is being written. Southeast Asia is a region of shared and distinct histories, of significant common ground in terms of the social, political, and historical, through experiences of and struggles with colonialism, nationalism, industrialization, and through conditions of hybridity and globalization. The art in the region demonstrates Southeast Asian artists' reflexive exploration of issues that arise from these contexts. The discourse that attends to the art and art making needs therefore to be highly reflexive. The understanding of history is also constantly evolving, which also begs questions as to the epistemological issues at stake. Further, the National Arts Gallery exploration of Southeast Asian art historiography raises a banner of Southeast Asian art from a museological base in Singapore. This calls for mindfulness as the terrain consists of trajectories from distinct nation states. each with its own abiding concerns and positioning in relation to each other and to the world. These are some of the issues and questions we seek to address through the Southeast Asia galleries. How do we understand Southeast Asia? What are the concepts of art? What shared experiences connect artists across the region? What are the key impulses that drive art? What are the significant influences and events that affect art? Who are the key artists and practitioners that have shaped art in Southeast Asia? And how is art in Southeast Asia linked to the region and the world? The Southeast Asia Gallery will be presented in 5 sections, each corresponding to a time frame from the 19th century to the present day. In the first section, titled Authority and Anxiety, for artists during this period, the colonial presence in Southeast Asia, or European influence in the case of Siam, introduced new genres, modes, and styles of representation. The 19th century is identified as the point of entry, as this period represents a profound change and even crisis in the art history of the region. And it can also be understood as marking the beginning of the modern period. This gallery will show examples of how Europeans represented the land, people, and material cultures of Southeast Asia through diverse visual practices such as topographical drawings, mapping, and illustrations for travelogues and ethnographic texts. The display will also refer to the taxonomy of the early colonial museums in Southeast Asia to demonstrate the evolution of art as a category. As a complex and interactive process, these different forms of representation had an impact on how Southeast Asians viewed their own culture and history. Art was used to suggest colonial authority over the terrain of Southeast Asia through means such as mapping, ethnographic photography, illustration, and landscape painting. At the same time, Southeast Asian artists also used art to assert their own cultural authority within the colonial setting. Early forerunners of modern Southeast Asian art created ambitious compositions in Western-style painting, subverting colonial expectations of local artists. This gallery will also show how Southeast Asian artists localized the conventions of European painting, either through combining them with pre-existing representational codes or using them to communicate local concerns, such as proto-nationalist sentiment. In the display for the 1900s to 1940s, we will be highlighting works that show the idealized landscapes of Southeast Asia by European and Southeast Asian artists. From the popularity of picturesque landscape painting to the proliferation of local themes and materials, Southeast Asian artists showed a heightened sensitivity to their locality in the tropics, itself a symptom of a nascent nationalistic consciousness. During the same period, European traveler artists exoticized the tropics in their representations, demonstrating the influence of Gauguin and the allure of Orientalism. Between the 1950s and the 1960s, the region emerged from the Second World War and post-colonial nations were birthed. Artists assertively engaged with ideas of nationhood, modernity, and internationalism, representing the issues of newly emergent nation states. As independent states came into being, the narrative of Southeast Asia continues to examine the meaning of art in this increasingly complex environment, driven by notions of nation, internationalism, and modernity. The idea of multiple modernities, rather than a singular Eurocentric narrative of modern art, is examined here, which aptly describes the artistic paths of Southeast Asian artists in their milieu. The next section will present a display of the broad spectrum of artistic activity taking place against the backdrop of a region emerging from the turbulent political conditions of the previous era. Bracketed by major world conflicts such as the conclusion of the Vietnam War in the mid-1970s, leading up to the Cold War in 1989, leading up to the end of the Cold War in 1989, as well as other international political crises, the art in this period is marked by an anti-formalist tendency that gravitated towards cultural and political awareness. The shift in power politics and greater consciousness-raising activities spilling over from the West had awakened a pluralism of voices that was made possible by the wider articulation of Southeast Asia's post-colonial position. especially with the exposure of Southeast Asian artists studying in the West. The ensuing growth of mass media and globalized art markets also meant that art had to reflect the increased pressures of contemporary societies in Southeast Asia. While serious in its aims, art during this period is also typified by parody, irony, satire, and incongruity as it provokes examination of the dilemmas of daily life. Conceptual installations and performative practices are brought to the fore, as well as representations that engage with identity politics. The last section of the Southeast Asia Gallery is in a way the most pertinent to the discussions at this forum and takes me back to my discussion at the start of my presentation. It examines the factors and the context of a burgeoning visual arts ecology in Asia in recent times. The internationalization of art through the global Biennale phenomenon and the opening up of the once Euro-American-centric discourse of art to include other sites of production offer a familiar enough picture of what needs to be taken into consideration for meaningful examinations of the visual arts in any locality. However, situated as we are within a region that is experiencing unparalleled interest in art collecting, curating, and research, Singapore can offer new perspectives and platforms for a remapping of a global art history that takes Southeast Asian art into account. Given the complexity and diversity of Southeast Asia, a better understanding of its development of modernism can allow us to better understand the development of art globally. This is perhaps the role that Singapore, the new National Art Gallery, can contribute towards. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene Tan. I've been to Southeast Asia many times, so what you talked about felt very real to me, especially Jane Lee is holding exhibition here in Tokyo as we speak. So Tokyo is part of that big wave that he talked about. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Chung Hyung-Min from National Museum of Modern Contemporary Art of Korea, which will open in November. She's the director of that museum. She's been educated in the States, but more recently, she has served as director of many different museums in Seoul. So it happens that last week, I visited this new museum that will open in November. It's very big. It's in the middle of Seoul, which I think is a very important event, and that this museum is going to open in the cultural center in Seoul.
Thank you for your introduction, and I'm very honored to take part in this wonderful forum. Okay, my topic today is building and programming of the 4-branch National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art Korea. If you see at the bottom, there are same logo with different colors. At the present, we have this Gwacheon, which is the headquarters, and then branch gallery at Deoksugung Palace. Then another museum in the center of the city of Seoul is due to open in less than a month. So I told earlier to Fumio Nanjo that I shouldn't be here at this moment. I should be really running around to get ready. Anyway, then there's another one here. This is this with a blue color. That branch gallery is due to open in 2015. About 2 hours drive from south from Seoul. So as you can see, for our museum, it's time of great expansion. from one headquarter branch gallery, then we are opening 2 more galleries. So I will talk about what this great expansion means for our museum while concentrating on this, the Seoul branch gallery. If I may give you the brief history of our museum, it has less than half a century. It was established in 1969 in a palace. We didn't have any building. Then it moved to another palace compound in 1973. Then in 1986, a new building was built in Gwacheon, which is present headquarters. Then the Doksugung Palace became the branch gallery. Then next month we are opening a new branch gallery in Seoul, and 2015 we are opening another one at Cheongju. So this is the Doksugung Palace. It was our museum in 1973 and became our branch gallery in 1998. And as you can see, it's a modern structure. It was designed during the colonial time by a Japanese architect, Nakamura Yoshihei, in 1937. So it's sort of a Japanese style Renaissance modern building. So as you may see, this is a 1937 building, so the building structure is not as, the height is very low of the hall. So this building will focus on the exhibition of art of modern period. Now this is our present headquarters in Gwacheon. Built in 1986, opened in the August, and it's a fairly large space. And as you can see, it's right in the middle of the park. So that's why the color of this museum is a green, because it's a museum in the park. It was designed by a Korean architect, Kim Jong-sung, who is now working in New York City. It has a very large outdoor space, so we have a pretty good size of a sculpture park. And this is the inside. As you walk in, we have the famous Namjoon Pack of 1,003 monitors. The title is "The More, the Better." And why the number of 1,003 is October 3 is the National Day of Korea. So he put in 1,003 pieces of monitor to build this gigantic tower. And this is the inside of Gwacheon headquarters. Then this is the, before I go into the Seoul Gallery, I'll show you briefly. The one due to open in 2015 down at Cheongju. Cheongju, if you see, this is a large factory, ginseng and tobacco factory, which is now out of use. And city of Cheongju allowed our museum to remodel it and use as the branch gallery of National Museum. And this space will be remodeled. So this area will be used as a national museum. And it's pretty large, 21,000 square meters. And as you can see, because it was a factory, it has very high ceiling, but it's wonderful space for contemporary art exhibition. But this building will be used mainly as a storage because our headquarters is running out of the storage space. So this building will be used as a storage, but a storage that can be walked in. That can be storage and exhibition gallery combined. Then we'll also build a very large conservation center. And this will be the first National Museum of Art outside of Seoul. And this is the picture of how it will be remodeled. So we have a huge headquarters at Gwacheon, and we are building huge storage at Cheongju. So why do we need to build another one in the center of the Seoul city? The reason is for over 10 years, the artists and art critics of Korea, our art community, had launched a campaign to have a National Museum of Contemporary Art not outskirts of Seoul, but right in the center of Seoul city. Because the present headquarters of Gwacheon is pretty far from the center. It's about 40 to maybe 1 hour drive from the center. So it has less accessibility than other contemporary art museums. So it was long campaign. After 10 years, the government decided to give a space in the center of the city to build to allow more accessibility for the art world that's going on at the present time. So where this new site is, this is, if you visited Korea, Seoul city is roughly divided into two areas. There is a Han River flowing. Then this is a northern part, which is called Gangbuk. And southern part is Gangnam. So Gangbuk is older part of Seoul city. And Gangnam is more recent, newly built area where all the business centers are there. And the new, actually it's more active area in Seoul. But the site of the Seoul branch will be in the northern part where more traditional architecture is still remained. So this will be the new site, and right across from the new site is the major traditional the palace, Gyeongbok Palace. Then around this area, this is the protected area of traditional architecture. So there are many small and large traditional housing complex. Then there are more palaces. So when the museum opens, it will be right in the middle of traditional architecture, or in the middle of the Korean history. This is the architectural plan, but actually I should be using this because it's all complete. It says I will show you the actual building. So this is the palace. So if you just cross the street, this is a museum that's open on all sides. So people can just walk in, and then they can just come to the restaurant and without even visiting the museum. So it will be maybe the center, kind of a cultural experience. And this is my room, so I can look down upon the traditional palace. So the project started in 2009, in January. At the New Year's gathering, the former president Lee Myung-bak announced this site will be given, permitted to build a National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, Seoul. It was a hard decision because it was a Defense Security Command site. So if you know the contemporary Korean history, it's an area that's not allowed, permitted for ordinary people to walk in. It's almost like a secret service office. And the site area is, for the center of the city, is pretty large, 2,700 square meter, and the floor area is also pretty large. It's 3 stories underground and 3 stories above the ground. It's pretty low structure because this entire area is protected in terms of the height of any new construction. And this entire area is very unique because it's composed of buildings of 3 different periods. This is Kimusa. There's a Defense Security Command, and in the back, which was built during the colonial time, 1929. Then in the back, there is a traditional structure called Jongchimbu. Then in between, this is new structure is built. If I may first introduce what this Kimusa building was in the past. This is still the same, this area. And it was first built in 1929 as a hospital building. It was during the colonial time, and the architect name is Park Gil-yong. Then there was a brook in front. Now it's covered. Then this was the hospital building. Then gradually the hospital expanded. And this is how it expanded over the years. In 2010, this building, the whole site was filled with apartments and the army hospital. But just only this, the original building of 1929 remained because it was registered as cultural property. So in Korea now, any building that's over 50 years are protected as cultural property. So this building cannot be remodeled or retouched. So, but before I show you the building, this building not just was a hospital or a defense security command, but it was the hospital that late President Park Chung-hee, who is the father of President Park Geun-hye, he passed at this building after being shot by his very closest aide. Then his wife also passed 6 years prior in this building. She was also shot by she was attacked. Then it was also a site where our also former President Chun Doo-hwan plotted coup d'etat in this building. So this is really a building that embraced a history almost of 90 years history of Korea. Sometimes it was happy, sometimes not so happy. This is a funeral shot of President Park. departing from this building. So except for this building, the remainder of the site was all pulled down. So in Korea still, a government can do it to allow a site to make it, to transform it into a different building of different functions. So this is the site when I was appointed as a director. It was nothing. It was all just grounded. And only this part remained, and all this building was pulled down. But this wasn't there. It wasn't there because in 1981, after the coup d'etat, when President Chun Doo-hwan became the president, he wanted to build a tennis court. So he pulled down this building and moved it to the nearby public library. But when this site was announced as the site of the National Museum of Korea, the Cultural Property Office demanded that the building should be put back to the original space. So the building was pulled down again from the public at the public library and put back here, and almost like a Lego, it was put back and took about more than 6 months. So this is the building that I'm talking about. This was the original picture prior to be pulled down in 1981. It was a very important building because it was office of a royal family genealogy, because this site was part of the Gyeongbok Palace. So it was a kind of official building. Now it's being put back, and this is the building that's now newly built, and here is the 1929 building. If you walk in from the street, you will see the rooftop of the traditional Joseon Dynasty building. And you walk in this cafeteria, this lobby, and it's roughly divided into 2 sections, educational space, lobby, and exhibition. And there's only 1 exhibition gallery above the ground. The remainder of 7 galleries are all built on the ground. As you see here, this is 1929 building. You walk in from the street, and then there's a lobby, and then you will see the very tall, about 17-meter high building. It's like a hut of the building, and this building, from this building, you can approach to the exhibition galleries. And then we have a movie house here. Then we have a multi-purpose hall. And this area is all educational area. Artists can come in as to work at the site. And the architectural concept is a group of islands. It's put together. So archipelagos is the concept of this building. And because each exhibition hall is separate from each other, and it's connected through a concept called madang. Madang is a very important element in Korean traditional architecture. It's the place where people gather together and people come in. It's a gathering place. And so there are 7 madang in this building. So even if the remainder of the exhibition halls are built underground, it has plenty of madang that invites light. And this is the concept of this Madang. It's called the Museum Madang, 미술관 Madang. So people will come through the Museum Madang and enter. Then there's Exhibition Madang, there's a 경복궁 Madang, there is a Library Madang. And this is 경복궁 Madang. So this is on the second floor. From this 경복궁 Madang, people will look down on the Gyeongbok Palace. And there's a beautiful mountain in the background, which was a favorite subject matter for traditional painters. This is a scene looked from the Gyeongbokgung Madang. He's the architect. He's, I think, 41. He's a very young architect. I always say that he didn't even design his own house. But anyway, he's very lucky to be commissioned to build this building. So as you can see, he seems pretty happy as his concept came out pretty close. The building to his concept. This is the box area. This, as I told you, is a heart space. It's right in the middle of this archipelagos. And from people walk in and through the window will watch the traditional architecture beyond the window. And this is the diagram. So for the opening exhibition, we invited an architect to build another architect. It's called the House Within the House. The artist's name is Do Ho-seo. He's very international, global artist, Korean artist. So the installation already started. So people actually can walk in through this silk house. So for the opening exhibition, the major theme is connecting and unfolding. Connecting means multi-level, has a multi-level meaning because its very site is composed of buildings of the different periods from traditional time to 21st century. So we really have to embrace. It's very seasoned building. It's very weathered building. We have to embrace the history and move towards the future. But also we have to embrace the visitors. We have to connect with the visitors and the art world. And we have to let museum visitors to participate in art. So connective, participatory, and relational aesthetic, that's all embraced in this our theme. And this is being done by through different curators. And there's another project called Aleph project, which will be showcased in the this multi-project hall. I'm going fast because I have 34 seconds. So this building, it's situated in an area where this is a number of, just on this side, this is our building, surrounded by not just by traditional architecture, but there are so many galleries and museums in this building. So up until recent years, this Gangbuk area, north of river area, was not so culturally active area because the business sector moved down to south of river. So when the museum opens, this area will be the north of river will be reactivated and probably enriched by many cultural activities. I think, and that's what I think should be the role of our museum. This is all cultural properties. The blue dots are Hanok, the traditional architecture buildings, and the yellow dots are museums, and the green dots are art galleries. So our museum will be right in the center of this cultural district. So this is the strategies. We have to, it's pretty much of all the museums of the world are sharing. We have to embrace the diversity of different genres, different expressions of art. We have to create exchange. We have to collaborate with different global art scenes. We have to contribute to the popularization of the contemporary art, because previously our museum was in the outskirts of the center of the city, so it has limited access. So now when this museum opens, both specialists and non-specialists will have very easy access to contemporary art. And we have to integrate all the different forms of expressions. We also have to specify our own brand, National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, Korea. This is what I looked out from my office. So it's being very lively. So what I imagine is, because this is the first museum in Korea without walls. It's open on 4 sides. So it'll be open to all the community, and also it will be open to global art scene. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We had numerous seasoned speakers, so when they are very impassioned about what they would like to talk about, they tend to talk longer than assigned. So we hardly have time left, but if you will be able to take the stage again, that would be good. Thank you very much for the 3 impressive speeches in a row. Since we are very much running out of time, so I don't think we will be able to go through discussions. But if there's one question that I would like to ask everyone. Part of them were already answered in the lecture. But each of the institutions, they are pretty much national institutions. As a national institution, you have been able to have this great, large scale with a big budget. The government pride is behind this as well. As a cultural identity, and I'm sure that there's a message that they would like to be able to send. Who do you think is the primary target audience in each of your facility, and what is the message that you would like to provide to your primary audience? And I know that they came up in your presentations, but if you will be able to answer to that, I would like to ask to each of the presenters. From you, Lars, please.
Well, I think it's important to mention that, of course, a museum in Hong Kong doesn't have a national museum. The national museums in China are in Beijing primarily. And Hong Kong has a very special position in terms of nationality and so forth, and is positioned in a sense in limbo between systems, nations, and so forth, which I think is one of the sort of true strengths of this project, and which also makes it very attractive for example, artists in the Chinese diaspora. They see it as a sort of neutral place with Chinese roots. But in terms of core audience, well, I mentioned that in principle, I mean, this project is conceived as a project for the people who live and work in Hong Kong. And it's really, I think you can say also at the core of it, it is an educational project. I don't think that one should look at education as an add-on to the museum, but it's, of course, everything you do in a museum is actually part of an interpretive process. Every choice you make as a curator and so forth is that. And we're trying to embrace that, but by already from day one, not having a separation between educational department and curatorial department, for example, but it's actually an integrated activity. And I mean, Hong Kong is a strange place, partly before colonial reasons. Actually, it was part of a British colonial principle to sort of not encourage exhibitions and art and promote certain types of culture like classic music and ballet and so forth. That means that Hong Kong has been sort of deprived of I think, exhibition space and of major exhibitions and of museums, if you look at the size of the city. And I think it's while at the same time it has a quite lively art scene, it has a quite a large number of really extraordinary artists, and of course in the last few years the art market has been driving an amazing development in terms of the art scene and so forth. So I think that the museum's role is to, I think, be this resource for the general public and the interested public and the art community to see things, experience things, debate things, and get access to things. And I think that's the sort of, it's like a platform for negotiating this meeting between art and the various audiences, and people come with different backgrounds. And I think that the educational side of the museum can't be underlined. I'd like to mention that I think that I was at a conference quite recently which was about art education, and it was a global conference, and basically everyone were complaining about the education for kids, that the schools don't provide good art education and you don't learn enough about art and culture and so forth. And then at the same time it struck me that you have huge differences in different cities and different countries in terms of the level of sophistication of the audience, how used they are to going to museums, how much they know about modern and contemporary art and so forth. And it struck me, it's so obvious that this is not thanks to or due to what's been happening in the schools. It's thanks to what's been happening in the art institutions, in the museums and the art galleries and so forth. That's where you build audience, that's where you actually, from children and up.
You said education, right? Through the education, what is the message? Because you said that the national is, Hong Kong is not the national. Yes, it's not China. Well, it's a part of China, but the special place. And then, so if Hong Kong government is putting so much money to make a museum, is it to tell that Hong Kong is different from China, or is it a part of China? What is the proportion of the exhibits between local art and international art? How is it?
I think, well, that was it started as an easy, simple question, and it got more and more complicated. I think it's which happens when you talk about these things. No, because funders, whether they're governments or private corporations or foundations and so, they may have different reasons for establishing an institution than actually you have as a director, and the practitioners and the curators and so forth have different reasons and different ideas. I think from the Hong Kong government's point of view, I think it's very simply that they see that Hong Kong is in many ways a complete city. It can offer so much to anyone who lives there or comes there in terms of education, quality of life, eating, shopping, but so many more things, hiking, you like it. But there's like a vacuum there. There's a lack of especially public institutions There is a private scene right now that is growing rapidly, but there is a vacuum. So I think from and they saw that they are not giving, I think, the population of Hong Kong what they deserve, that they should deserve when they live in a large metropolis like Hong Kong. So I think it's that kind of offer. Then I think that you can talk to, say, the tourism bureau, and they would like to see more tourists, and you can talk to those who work with attracting new finance institutions to relocate to Hong Kong, and they would say, oh, it would help to relocate, families and so to Hong Kong because they are looking for these kind of qualities in a city. But in terms of, I don't think there is, or there isn't an agenda in terms of saying that Hong Kong art is more important than other types of art, or to sort of, I don't think there is an agenda in terms of the content. I think the agenda is rather to provide a platform, to provide access and a site for discussion, debate, and examination.
Okay. Eugene Tan,
I think when the National Art Gallery was announced by the government, I think one of the important things was that it was really for Singapore itself. I think there's never, the understanding of art history in Singapore and Southeast Asia is very lacking, I think. We still don't have art history being taught in our universities, and art education in schools is also not as good as it can be. So I think when the government decided to build a National Art Gallery, education was at the heart of this. And to grow the understanding and appreciation of art, not just Southeast Asian art. I think we start with Singapore and Southeast Asia because that is where we come from and that's our immediate environment and context. But it's also for us to understand how then our art relates to the global and to the international. One thing I forgot to talk about earlier was that we have a Center for Art Education. So we have one whole floor in our museum devoted to a Center for Art Education aimed at children from 2 years old right up to 12, having different spaces and different programs for different types of different age groups. And likewise, our programming team are also working closely with our schools to incorporate art into their curriculum with the Ministry of Education. So we do see education as being a big part of what we do as well. And like Lars, we don't see it as separate, but it's kind of together as well.
Singapore is not doesn't have a big population. So if you make such a big museum, of course you expect the audience from foreign countries, visitors, tourists. So what do you see the proportion of these?
That's true. I think we expect the proportion of our visitors to be international visitors to Singapore. But we hope that this proportion will decrease over time so that the percentage of Singaporean audiences will start growing and in time be larger than the international visitors that we have.
Also, I noticed that your museum is trying to represent not just Singapore, but also the region. That your museum is trying to be a kind of showcase of the South Asian art, right?
Yes, I don't think we seek to represent the region as such. But we seek to be a platform, as Lars said, for the international art world, for the global art world, to better understand our region, to be this platform to reach out. Because I think for this, we are working very closely with the national museums and national art galleries of all the various Southeast Asian countries. And we'll be borrowing from the collections and showcasing the collections as well as part of our exhibitions.
Chun-san, on the same question, how about what do you answer?
Because we are expanding in terms of size, we are at the moment of defining the roles of our museum. So I define as first exhibition, collecting and exhibition, second art education, and third research. I think more and more the museum's role, among the museum role, research is becoming very important for museum. So our present headquarters, which is outside of Seoul, will be the center of research. So that area, more art specialists will make trouble to visit. But at Gwacheon, at the present moment, we have only 1% of international visitors. So the Seoul Branch Gallery will be expecting more international visitors, non-art specialists, and will show more ongoing art at Seoul. So with this expansion, we are targeting both specialists and non-specialists, art specialists, and both national and international visitors. And I think we can do it because we have enough buildings to carry on these projects.
Just to make sure that your collection is all Korean art?
Our collection, 90% is Korean. So our mission is because it's National Museum, it's different from private museum. We represent contemporary Korean art. But we'll be expanding a little bit of international art. But my emphasis is on contemporary Korean art.
Actually, I wanted to make you to question each other and make a discussion, but it seems the time is completely over. So I just want to ask you one more question for the future, okay? Do you think you can collaborate together for future?
Yes, I was hoping that Eugene and I should have a conversation in the afternoon at some point.
What can I say?
And I'm sure we can as well.
Yes, sir, we will.
Yeah.
We'll collaborate.
In the future, because I noticed that the modern art in this region, even modern art, was still very separated. Mm-hmm. And when I went to Taiwan recently and saw the many modern paintings related to Japan and China, and and also their experience after the war is very similar and different. Only one museum in Japan, in Shizuoka Prefecture, they collected, juxtaposed the modern paintings from Korea, China, Taiwan, and Japan, which was quite challenging. But I think that in the future, the museums in this region should collaborate, explore, and the research, the relation between each other, and also what is going to happen in the future, which is quite exciting project. And I really want to propose these possibilities to you all.
Well, it sounds like it's long overdue. I mean, this has been the practice. I have my experience mainly from Europe and to some extent from America, and of course, it happens all the time there. Yeah. So we should, and I'm sure it does happen here, but not as much as it should. Mm. And we have discussions already.
Yes, we already have discussions now. Yes.
Yeah, we'll have more, this kind of forum, and this really provides, future collaboration, interaction. So
okay.
Next time we'll have this forum, similar forum at Seoul.
So I think the time is over. So I'd like to close this session, but I saw a lot of possibilities in the museums in Asia, and we have so many possibilities, projects, and maybe discussions and opportunities to meet new people. So I really hope that it will happen soon, more and more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, Mr. Lars Nittve, Mr. Eugene Tan, and Ms. Chung Hyung-Min, and Mr. Nanjo, the moderator. Thank you very much. Please give them a big hand. I'd like to thank the speakers.